The sun cast its harsh glow over the neighborhood, bouncing off the shimmering pool water in my backyard. Another sweltering afternoon stretched out before me, blending seamlessly into the monotony of my days. I sipped my iced tea, staring into the rippling water, feeling a pang of longing. Not for anything specific, but for something more than this. Something I couldn't quite name. Robert, my husband, had left early that morning, muttering something about a client meeting. Lately, his voice sounded distant, like static on an old radio. I heard the creak of the gate opening and glanced up. Jack, the pool boy, stepped through, his tall, athletic frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight. He was in his mid-20s, with sun-kissed skin and a mop of dark, tousled hair. He moved with an ease that spoke of confidence, his tank top clinging to his toned torso as he carried a heavy pool skimmer over one shoulder. I shouldn't have noticed things, but I did every time. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice friendly but professional as always. I offered him a polite smile. "Hi, Jack. Hot day, isn't it?" "Yeah, it's brutal," he replied, setting his equipment down by the pool. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and glanced at me briefly before turning his attention to the water. "Good thing you've got this to cool off in." I laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign to me lately. I hardly use it. It's more for show, I guess. Jack frowned slightly, crouching by the pool's edge to test the water with his hand. "That's a shame. It's a perfect day for a swim." I watched him work, his movements efficient and deliberate. He had been coming here twice a week for over a year, but we had rarely spoken, beyond polite exchanges. Today, though, something compelled me to linger. Maybe it was the heat, or maybe it was the way his easy demeanor contrasted so sharply with the sterile predictability of my life. "Do you ever get tired of this?" I asked suddenly, surprising even myself. Jack glanced up at me, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Cleaning pools all day," I said, gesturing vaguely. "It seems repetitive." He shrugged, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's not bad. Keeps me outdoors. And it pays the bills while I figure out what's next." "What is next?" I asked, genuinely curious. He leaned on the pool skimmer, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm taking night classes, hoping to get into sports management eventually, but for now, this works." His answer was straightforward, without a hint of self-pity or resentment. It made me feel a little ashamed of my own restlessness. I had everything. A beautiful home, a hard-working husband, 2 great kids, but somehow it still felt like not enough. "That's admirable," I said, and I meant it. Jack smiled again, this time a little wider. "Thanks. So, what about you? What keeps you busy?" The question caught me off guard. What did keep me busy? Organizing charity events? Hosting book club meetings? None of it felt worth mentioning. I waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, the usual suburban housewife stuff." He chuckled softly and returned to his work, but his words lingered with me long after he left that day. The next time Jack came by, I found myself waiting for him. I told myself it was just boredom, that I had no other plans for the afternoon, but deep down I knew it was more than that. I wanted to talk to him again, to feel that flicker of interest that had sparked during our last conversation. He arrived right on time, as he always did, and greeted me with a smile that felt warmer than usual. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harper." "Emily," I corrected him. "You've been coming here long enough. No need to be so formal." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Good afternoon, Emily." There was something satisfying about hearing my name in his voice, something I couldn't quite explain. I offered him a glass of lemonade, using the excuse of the heat, and he accepted gratefully. We sat on the patio for a while, chatting about nothing in particular, his classes, the latest book I was reading, the state of the neighborhood association. It was easy, comfortable, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I wasn't counting the minutes until the next chore or obligation. "You're not what I expected," Jack said at one point, his tone thoughtful. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what did you expect?" He grinned a little sheepishly. "I don't know. Most people around here barely notice me unless something's wrong with their pool." "Well, I guess I'm not most people," I replied lightly, but the words hung in the air between us, carrying a weight neither of us acknowledged. That evening, as I sat across from Robert at the dinner table, I found myself thinking about Jack. Robert was scrolling through his phone, only half listening, as I recounted a story about our son's soccer practice. I realized with a pang of sadness that I couldn't remember the last time he had looked at me the way Jack had earlier. Really looked at me, as though I were someone worth noticing. "Did you hear what I said?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Robert glanced up, his brow furrowed. "What? Sorry, I was just checking an email. What were you saying?" "Hmm, Never mind," I muttered, stabbing at my salad with my fork. The conversation died there, as it often did, and the silence stretched out like a chasm between us. The next week, Jack arrived a little later than usual. I was pruning the roses in the garden when I heard the familiar creak of the gate, followed by his cheerful greeting. "Afternoon, Emily." I turned to see him walking toward the pool, his stride unhurried. He looked more relaxed than usual, his tank top replaced by a faded t-shirt, his hair slightly damp as though he had just come from another job. "You're late," I teased, trying to keep my tone light. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Got held up at the last house. Hope you don't mind." "Not at all," I said, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves. "As long as you're here now." He set down his tools and started his usual routine, but today I noticed something different. The way his movements seemed slower, almost deliberate, as though he was aware of my gaze. The way his eyes lingered on me a moment longer than they should when I handed him a bottle of water. "Thanks," he said softly, his fingers brushing against mine as he took the bottle. It was the briefest of touches, but it sent a jolt through me, like the first crackle of a storm on the horizon. I pulled my hand back quickly, pretending to adjust my hat, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was dangerous, thrilling, and completely unexpected. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Act 2. The Invitation. The days following that brief touch were restless. I told myself I was imagining things, that Jack was simply being polite and that my reaction was absurd. But the truth was harder to ignore. I found myself replaying the moment over and over, wondering if he had felt the same spark or if it was all in my head. The heat wave continued, unrelenting, as though the weather itself conspired to keep me tethered to these simmering thoughts. I kept busy with household tasks, the kind that demanded little mental focus, but every time I walked past the pool or saw Jack's name in my contact list, saved there for emergencies, I felt a small jolt of anticipation. On Wednesday afternoon he arrived, the sound of the gate creaking snapping me out of my reverie. I was already on the patio with a glass of iced tea, pretending to read a novel that had sat unopened for weeks. "Afternoon, Emily," Jack said as he walked in, his voice light but warm. "Hi, Jack," I replied, keeping my tone casual. I set the book down and watched him as he began setting up his equipment. "You're not melting yet, are you?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not yet, but it's close." I noticed the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way his shirt clung to his back. "You could use a break," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Come, sit. I'll get you something cold." He hesitated, glancing at the pool and then at me. "I don't want to slack off." "Consider it in order," I teased, standing before he could refuse. When I returned with a tall glass of lemonade, Jack was sitting, his posture relaxed for the first time. He accepted the drink with a quiet thanks and took a long sip, his throat moving as he swallowed. I found myself staring, captivated by the simple motion. "You know," he began, setting the glass down, "you're the only person who's ever offered me a drink while I'm working. Most people just point to the pool and disappear." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "I guess I'm not like most people." His eyes flicked to mine, a faint glimmer of something unreadable crossing his face. "No, you're not." The air between us grew heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore. I cleared my throat, looking away. "So, how are the classes going?" He leaned back, his expression softening. "Good. A little tough balancing everything, but I'll get there." The conversation drifted into safer territory, his classes, his plans, the latest neighborhood gossip. But even as we talked, I couldn't shake the awareness of his presence, the subtle shifts in his tone when he addressed me. When he stood to get back to work, I almost asked him to stay, but the words caught in my throat. The next time he came, I found myself lingering by the pool as he worked, pruning some shrubs that didn't really need it. I was hyper aware of the sun on my skin, the sheen of sweat on my arms. I could feel Jack's gaze on me every so often, though he never said a word. "Emily," he called after a while, his voice carrying across the yard. "Do you have a second?" I turned, brushing my hands on my gardening gloves. "What's up?" He stood by the pool filter, his brows furrowed. "The valve here looks a little off. Could you come take a look?" It was a simple request, innocuous on the surface, but my heart raced as I crossed the yard. I knelt beside him, our shoulders almost touching, and peered at the equipment he was pointing to. "It looks fine to me," I said after a moment, glancing at him. His face was closer than I expected, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure," he said softly. I... His voice had dropped, the tone laced with something heavier. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I was hyper aware of the inches between us, the warmth radiating from his skin. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, shaking his head slightly. "Sorry, never mind." I stood quickly, brushing off my shorts. "No problem, let me know if you need anything else." I walked away without looking back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Later that week, I was sitting in the living room when the doorbell rang, expecting a package. I opened the door without thinking, only to find Jack standing there, holding a small bag of tools. "Jack," I said, startled. "What are you doing here?" "Sorry for the surprise," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I noticed one of the pool lights was out earlier, thought I'd swing by and fix it before it gets dark. Oh, I said, suddenly aware of how casual I looked in my tank top and shorts. You didn't have to do that. It's no trouble, he replied, his gaze steady. Do you mind? I shook my head, stepping aside to let him in. Of course not. He walked through the house toward the backyard, his presence filling the space in a way that felt almost too intimate. I followed at a distance, unsure of what to say. As he crouched by the pool to work, I stood awkwardly nearby, my arms crossed. Do you need any help? I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. He glanced up at me, a faint smile playing on his lips. I think I've got it, but thanks. I nodded, biting my lip. I should have gone back inside, given him space, but something held me there. When he finished, he stood, brushing off his hands. All set, he said, his voice low. Thank you, I murmured, my gaze locked on his. The air between us felt heavy again, charged with unspoken tension. He took a step closer, his expression serious. Emily, I held up a hand, stopping him. Jack, don't! But even as I said it, I didn't move away. I stayed rooted in place, my breath catching as his hand brushed against mine. It was the lightest touch, barely there, but it sent a jolt through me, the same spark I'd felt the last time. Tell me to leave, he said quietly, his voice almost pleading. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I can't. For a moment, everything else faded away, the pool, the house, the consequences. There was only him, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The next time Jack arrived, I wasn't prepared for him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the yard as he let himself in through the gate. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when I saw him through the window. My heart leapt before I could stop it. His presence, once routine, now carried a charge I couldn't ignore. I stepped outside, my hands brushing nervously against my shorts. Hi, Jack, I said, my voice softer than I intended. He looked up from uncoiling the pool vacuum, a small smile crossing his face. Hey, Emily. There was a tension in his tone, subtle but unmistakable. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded toward the pool. I'll just get started. I hovered on the patio, unsure of what to do with myself. Normally, I would have gone back inside, leaving him to his work. But today, I found excuses to stay. The heat, I told myself, it was too hot to do much of anything, and the shade of the pergola provided a good enough reason to linger. Jack moved efficiently, his arms flexing as he guided the vacuum along the pool floor. I tried not to stare, but my gaze betrayed me more than once. He caught me looking at him, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met. Neither of us said anything, but the air grew heavier with the things left unspoken. Something wrong? He asked finally, his voice breaking the silence. I shook my head quickly. No, nothing, just watching. He smirked, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. You're making me nervous. I laughed, a sound that felt strange and unfamiliar. Sorry, I'll stop. But I didn't. When he finished, Jack set the equipment aside and walked toward me, his shirt damp with sweat and clinging to his chest. He grabbed a bottle of water from his bag and took a long drink before wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Done for the day? I asked, my voice casual despite the way my pulse raced. Yeah, All set. He hesitated, looking at me for a moment before continuing. Unless there's anything else you need. The question hung in the air, weighted with possibility. I opened my mouth to respond, but found myself at a loss for words. My mind raced, searching for an answer that wouldn't betray the thoughts swirling inside me. I don't think so, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, his gaze lingering on mine. All right, then. But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his expression unreadable. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, mingling with the warmth of the summer air. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I might faint under the weight of the tension building between us. Emily, he said softly, his voice low and steady. Tell me if I'm wrong. About what? I managed to say, though my voice trembled. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from mine. About this. About what I think is happening here. I could have denied it, I should have, but instead I stayed silent, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He took my silence as permission and stepped closer still, his fingers brushing against mine. Stop me, he whispered, his eyes locked on mine. I can. His hand moved to my face, his touch gentle but electric. I leaned into him without thinking, my body betraying every logical thought, screaming at me to pull away. When his lips met mine, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The kiss was tentative at first, as though we were both testing the waters, but it quickly deepened, fueled by weeks of tension that neither of us had acknowledged until now. My hands found their way to his shoulders, gripping the fabric of his shirt as though it were the only thing keeping me upright. His arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. The kiss was desperate and hungry, a collision of need and longing that had been building for far too long. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my heart racing as I looked up at him. His expression mirrored my own, equal parts exhilaration and fear. Emily, he said again, his voice rough with emotion. I know, I whispered, stepping back. This is wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping to the ground. I didn't mean for this to happen. Neither did I said, though the words felt hollow. But it did. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The reality of what we had done sinking in. I knew I should tell him to leave, to never come back, but the thought of it made my chest ache. Jack, I began, my voice shaking. I don't know what to do. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of longing and regret. Neither do I. But I know I can't stay away. His admission sent a shiver down my spine, equal parts thrilling and terrifying. I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that we had to stop this before it went any further, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, the unspoken agreement hanging between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the kiss in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel his touch, the way his lips had moved against mine, the heat of his body pressed against me. It was intoxicating, but it was also suffocating. Robert lay beside me, his breathing slow and even. I glanced at him, guilt twisting in my chest. He had no idea what had happened, what I had done. And yet, a part of me didn't regret it. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Truly alive. but at what cost? As the hours ticked by, I knew I couldn't undo what had been done. The kiss had changed everything, and there was no going back. All I could do now was wait and see what came next. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen glances and secret moments. Jack's visits became the highlight of my days, and I found myself counting down the hours until he'd arrive. The boundaries between us had shifted irreversibly, and though we both knew the risks, neither of us could seem to stop. It started innocently enough, lingering a little longer by the pool after he finished his work, sharing quiet conversations that felt far more intimate than they should have. But soon, the lines blurred completely. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the yard in golden hues, we found ourselves alone again. Jack had just finished cleaning the filter and was drying his hands with a towel. I was sitting on the edge of a lounge chair, nervously twisting the hem of my sundress. I didn't know why I had stayed outside so long, except that I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft but concerned. I looked up at him, my chest tightening at the sight of his sunlit silhouette. "Yeah," I lied, "just thinking." He walked over and sat beside me on the edge of the chair, his presence overwhelming in its closeness. "About what?" I hesitated, my heart racing. About how complicated this is, about how wrong it feels, but also how I can't stop. His expression softened, a mixture of understanding and pain. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I think about you all the time, Emily, and I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it." I swallowed hard, his words slicing through my defenses. "Jack, this can't..." But before I could finish, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that silenced every argument in my head. I melted into him, my hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms wrapped around me. The world disappeared, leaving only the heat of his touch and the frantic rhythm of my heart. When we pulled apart, we were both breathless, the weight of what we had done pressing heavily on us. We can't keep doing this," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. "I know," he said, his forehead resting against mine, "but I don't want to stop." Neither did I. Our secret meetings became a routine. Jack would finish his work, and instead of leaving, he'd stay. We'd talk, kiss, and sometimes just sit in silence, letting the tension between us speak louder than words. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Every moment with him felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff, knowing that one wrong move could send everything crashing down. I tried to keep my life with Robert as normal as possible, but the guilt was a constant undercurrent. At night, as he slept beside me, I'd lie awake, torn between the excitement of my forbidden connection with Jack and the weight of the betrayal I was committing. "You've been distracted lately," Robert said one evening over dinner, his tone casual but probing. I froze, my fork hovering in midair. "Have I?" He nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Yeah, is everything all right?" "Of course," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Busy with the kids, the house, you know how it is." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Still, his words lingered in my mind, a reminder that the walls were closing in. One afternoon, as Jack and I sat by the pool, a new tension filled the air. He had been quieter than usual, his gaze distant as though something weighed heavily on his mind. "Is everything okay?" I asked, reaching out to touch his arm. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. About us, about what we're doing. My stomach tightened. Jack, if you want to stop. No, he interrupted, his voice firm. I don't, but I'm worried. About you, about your family. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I know, I said quietly. I think about that too, but I don't know how to stop. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek. I don't want to hurt you, Emily. Or make your life harder. And then, overnight, tears welled in my eyes, the weight of our situation threatening to crush me. You're not. You've made me feel alive again, Jack. I don't regret any of this. His thumb brushed against my cheek, wiping away a stray tear. Neither do I. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world around us fading into the background. But as much as I wanted to lose myself in him, the reality of our actions loomed large. The first sign of trouble came from our neighbor, Karen. She was the type who thrived on gossip, always peering over her fence to see what everyone was up to. I hadn't noticed her watching that day when Jack stayed longer than usual, but later, as I was leaving to pick up groceries, she cornered me in the driveway. Hey, Emily, she said, her tone too sweet to be genuine. Saw your pool boy here the other day. You sure keep him busy. I forced a laugh, keeping my tone light. Oh, there's always something that needs fixing. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, just thought I'd say hi. Have a good day. I drove away with my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing. Karen's comment was innocuous on the surface, but it carried an edge that left me feeling exposed. I knew I had to be more careful. The stakes were too high. One evening, Robert came home earlier than expected. I was in the backyard with Jack, our conversation low and intimate, when the sound of the front door slamming startled us both. Emily? Robert's voice called out. Panic surged through me. He's not supposed to be home yet, I whispered, my heart racing. Jack stood quickly, his expression tense. I should go. I nodded, my mind scrambling for an excuse as Jack slipped out the side gate. When Robert appeared a moment later, I plastered on a smile, hoping he wouldn't notice the flush in my cheeks. What's going on? He asked, his gaze shifting from me to the pool. Nothing, I said, my voice steady. Just tidying up out here. He frowned but didn't press further, and I let out a silent sigh of relief. But the close call left me shaken. The walls were closing in, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those days that felt deceptively normal. Jack had arrived earlier than usual, his expression unreadable as he unloaded his tools. I was inside folding laundry when I saw him through the window. There was something different about his movements, less sure, more distracted. I decided to step outside, drawn by an inexplicable pull. Hey, I said softly as I approached. You okay? Jack looked up, his face breaking into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, just tired, I guess. I placed a hand on his arm, my touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. His gaze softened, but before he could reply, the unmistakable sound of a car engine revving in the driveway sent a jolt of panic through me. Robert wasn't supposed to be home for hours. What's going on? Jack asked, his voice low. "It's Robert," I whispered, my heart pounding. "He's early." Jack's expression hardened as he glanced toward the side gate. "I'll leave." Before I could respond, the back door slammed open, and there he was, Robert, his tie loosened, his briefcase in hand, and his eyes scanning the scene. The tension was palpable, the kind that filled every inch of the air between us. "What's going on here?" Robert asked, his tone sharp as his gaze flicked between Jack and me. "Robert, this is Jack. He's the—" I started, but the words caught in my throat. "I know who he is," Robert interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "Why is he still here?" Jack straightened, his demeanor calm but his jaw set. "I was just finishing up." Robert's lips tightened into a thin line. "Then you should leave." Jack glanced at me, his expression unreadable, before nodding. He gathered his things quickly and left through the side gate without another word. The sound of the latch clicking shut was deafening. When we were alone, Robert turned to me, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on, Emily?" N- Nothing, I said quickly, my voice trembling. "He was just... y- Don't lie to me," Robert snapped, his tone cold. "I'm not an idiot." My chest tightened, and I felt the weight of the truth pressing down on me. "Robert, please, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" he demanded, stepping closer, "because from where I'm standing, it looks bad, really bad." Tears welled in my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. I, I, I didn't mean for it to happen," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert's face fell, his anger replaced by a look of betrayal, so raw it made my stomach twist. "So, it's true," he said, his voice cracking. "You and him." "It's not like that," I said desperately, reaching for him. "I swear, Robert, I never wanted to hurt you." He pulled away, his expression cold. "You didn't just hurt me, Emily. You destroyed us." The hours that followed were a blur of arguments and accusations. Robert's voice rose and fell, each word cutting deeper than the last. He demanded to know how long it had been going on, why I had done it, what I was thinking. I had no answers that would satisfy him, no justification for the choices I had made. "I gave you everything," he said bitterly, pacing the living room. "This house, this life. Was it not enough?" "It's not about that," I said, my voice breaking. "It was never about that." "Then what?" he shouted. "What was it about, Emily?" I wiped at my tears, my hand shaking. I don't know. I was lonely. I felt invisible. And Jack, he made me feel alive again." Robert stared at me, his jaw clenched. "Alive," he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "At the expense of everything we built together. At the expense of our family." The mention of our family sent a fresh wave of guilt crashing over me. Our children. How would they react if they knew? What kind of example had I set for them? "Robert, please," I begged, my voice raw. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I love our family." He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "You have a funny way of showing it." That night, Robert slept in the guest room. The silence in the house was suffocating, each creak and groan of the walls amplifying the emptiness I felt. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day in my mind. The look on Robert's face, the weight of his words, they were wounds that wouldn't heal easily. I thought of Jack, too, wondering where he was, what he was thinking. I knew I couldn't contact him, not after everything that had happened, but the thought of never seeing him again filled me with a deep, aching sadness. The next morning, Robert was gone before I woke up. A note on the kitchen counter informed me he was staying at a hotel for a few days to clear his head. The emptiness of the house felt even more pronounced without him there. I spent the day cleaning, scrubbing floors, wiping counters, anything to keep my hands and mind busy. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the reality of what I had done. I had shattered the life we had built, and now all I could do was wait and hope there was something left to salvage. When the kids came home from school, I put on a brave face, pretending everything was fine. But they noticed the tension, the absence of their father, and the questions started to come. "Where's Dad?" my daughter asked, her eyes filled with concern. "He had to go on a work trip," I lied, forcing a smile. "He'll be back soon." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and went to her room. I watched her go, my heart heavy with guilt. They didn't deserve this. None of them did. That evening, I sat alone in the backyard, staring at the pool. It looked so still, so serene, as though it were mocking the chaos inside me. The memories of my time with Jack played in my mind, bittersweet and painful. I had felt alive with him, yes, but at what cost? The sound of my phone buzzing pulled me from my thoughts. It was a text from Robert. "We need to talk tomorrow." My chest tightened as I read the words. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another, but for now, all I could do was wait. The next morning felt heavy, the hours crawling by as I awaited Robert's return. I tried to keep myself busy, but everything I did, folding laundry, washing dishes, even preparing breakfast, felt futile. My hands trembled as I wiped the counters for the third time that morning, my mind spinning with every possible scenario of how the day would unfold. He looked at me, his eyes hard. "I can't forgive you. Not right now." The words hit me like a blow, but I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I understand." "Do you?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Do you really understand what you've done to us, to this family?" "I do," I said softly, my voice breaking, "and I'm so sorry. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make it right." His laugh was bitter. "Make it right? Emily, this isn't something you can just fix. You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't look away. "I know, and I hate myself for it." For a moment, his expression softened, but it was fleeting. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I'm staying at the hotel for now. I need space, time to figure out what I want to do." I nodded, my heart sinking. "What about the kids?" "We'll tell them together," he said firmly, "but not yet, not until I've made a decision." I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay, but I knew it would only push him further away. Instead, I simply said, "Okay." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her curiosity. "Of course. Well, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." I thanked her and walked away, my jaw tight. The last thing I needed was for Karen to start spreading rumors, as if things weren't already bad enough. That evening, Robert came by the house to see the kids. They were thrilled to have him home, even if only for a short time. I stayed in the background, giving them space, but I couldn't help overhearing snippets of their conversation. Are you and Mom okay? My daughter asked, her voice small. Robert hesitated before answering. We're working through some things, he said gently. But no matter what happens, we both love you. That will never change. Tears stung my eyes and I slipped away before they could see me. A week later, Robert and I sat down to talk again. This time, he was calmer, though the distance between us was still palpable. I've been thinking, he said, his tone measured. I don't know if we could and get back to where we were, Emily, but for the sake of the kids, I'm willing to try. Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by the realization that this was only the beginning of a long road. Thank you, I said, my voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes. He nodded, but his expression remained guarded. This isn't going to be easy for either of us, but I'm willing to take it one day at a time. So am I said, my chest tightening with both hope and fear. In the weeks that followed, we started attending counseling sessions. It was uncomfortable at first, but gradually we began to communicate in ways we hadn't for years. The road to rebuilding trust was slow and fraught with setbacks, but it was a road we were both willing to walk,